Hey yo, and welcome to the dojo. My name is Code, and today we're going to be taking a look at the Japanese Champion League. For those of you that aren't aware, Japan doesn't have regionals like we do. They have something called Champions League, where it's a massive tournament, usually around 3,000 players, and they play best of one, and they fight for the right to be Pokemon champion. And today I thought we would take a look at the most recent results from the Sapporo Champions League tournament that took place in Japan on May 3rd and 4th. Let's dive in. So today we're going to be taking a look at the top 16 decks to help us decide what we think is going to be the best deck in format once Twilight Masquerade comes out. Because of course, Japan always gets their sets ahead of us. So this tournament was played with all the cards that we will be receiving in Twilight Masquerade. So let's dive in. So from the very start, you might notice some themes here. For one, there is a lot of Dragapult in the top 16, and also quite a bit of Lugia. Then there's some other decks, and we'll just start with the very first place list. And we don't have lists, it looks like, for all these decks, unfortunately, but we do have at least half of them. But the first place deck was a Miraidon list. How about them apples? Miraidon back on top? Impossible. Why? Well, let's first talk about this list, and then we'll get into the why. So this is looking like a pretty standard Miraidon list that people used to play on first glance. We got just some Miraidons, some Hands, Raikou, Raichu, Zapdos. Got all those standard dudes, and a Mew X to help out so you don't get into troublesome situations. Got the Squawk ability, so you can get a good first strong turn. We have a bundle in here now. And the other interesting card, maybe for Pokemon-wise, is the Radiant Greninja and Tatsugiri. Tatsugiri is a new card in this set, of course, that allows us, once during your turn this Pokemon's in the active spot, you may look at the top 6 cards of your deck, reveal a supporter you find there, and put it into your hand, then shuffle the other cards back into your deck. So very similar to what Mysterious Mew was offering us in last format, but instead of item cards, we're grabbing supporter cards. So kind of cool. And speaking of supporter cards, what are we playing in this deck? 4 Research, 3 Arven, 3 Boss. Pretty basic, but when you're playing best of one, you probably just want something very consistent and you want to get your game plan going every single game. And what else do we need to get our game plan going? We need some Pokemon search. We're playing 4 Nest Ball. Have the 4 electric generators because of course we're trying to get those big KOs as fast as we can. 1 Ultra Ball for good measure, a Lost Vacuum, probably a tech for the various decks that are playing different tool cards, and as well as getting rid of maybe some annoying stadiums. I'm not sure if we'll see it in any of the lists today, but there is a new stadium that causes trouble for decks like Miraidon, which is the Jamming Tower, which basically it disables all tool cards in play. So your heavy batons don't work, your rescue boards don't work, your bravery charms don't work. So you don't want that pesky thing hanging around. So having a vacuum could be useful. And looks like we're playing 1 switch for good measure, and the ace spec of choice here is the Prime Catcher. And then of course we're playing 16 basic lightning. That's a lot, folks. That is a lot. And 2 double turbo. We're playing 2 double turbo, of course, because we want to consistently power up our Iron Hands EX as fast as possible. If we get a double hit from our generator and just attach that double turbo, we can be amping you very much for some extra prize cards. Very cool. But why? Why did this deck take first place when all we heard about coming into this new set was Dragapult and Lugia? Well, it turns out Lugia is weak to lightning, and Dragapult has a lot of little dudes that you can maybe take advantage of if you can consistently pull off amping them early, and you can really aggress with them. And also, Dragapult, although it can hit the numbers over 2 turns, it can't cleanly hit 220. It's doing 200 damage to active and 60 spread to the bench. So maybe you play the Radiant Alakazam so you can get the KO the following turn by moving some damage counters around. But it can be a little tricky. And the same goes then for the Iron Hands, especially since it has that 230 health. It's even harder to KO unless you can get some damage on it before it comes into the active. So cool deck, Miraidon wins it all, but let's talk about the second place list, which is super interesting as well. It's a Gardevoir list. And this list is actually pretty nasty. We see classic cards like Cresselia come back into the deck. And this is to help maybe offset some of that Dragapult damage that's being spread throughout the board. Cresselia was really good in Gardevoir when Lost Box was really dominating the format with Sableye spreading damage around. So the same concept exists in this current format with Dragapult. And the really cool inclusion is this Monkey Dory, which I don't remember the ability's name, but as you can see this little symbol here, if there's a darkness energy attached to this Pokemon, once per turn, you can move 30 damage from your side of the field to your opponent's side of the field. So very similar to Cresselia's attack, but it's 30 damage as an effect once per turn. So what can that do? Why is that so good? Well, you can heal Pokemon, and you can also actually, this fixes Gardevoir's math in very interesting ways. Let's say you're Psychic Embracing to your Gardevoir EX here. So we Psychic Embrace 3 energies, doing 60 damage to ourselves, right? And then we use that Monkey Dory's ability to remove 30 of those damage counters. So now we only have 30 damage on, making this Gardevoir harder to KO. And let's say we move those damage counters to the active Pokemon. That's kind of like Gardevoir is hitting for 220, which is a very relevant number with a lot of smaller EXs and basic Vs. So the Monkey Dory is a super cool inclusion. And the other thing that's really wild about this deck is Irida. This player is playing 4 Irida in a Gardevoir deck, which is kind of wild. But they're basically saying, I want to make sure that I can get out my Radiant Greninja to help discard these energies, the psychic energies that is. Or they're saying, I really need to get this Manaphy out to help protect my bench. And Irida can help out with that. Maybe this should be an Arven. I would probably play this as an Arven, but it's definitely interesting. Other than that, the next thing we come up to here that's a little bit different is the Hyper Aroma. Search your deck for up to 3 stage 1 Pokemon, reveal them and put them into your hand, then shuffle your deck. So the idea here is we notice we're not playing Arven, and because we're not playing Arven, we're also not playing TM Evolution. So this is kind of a replacement for TM Evolution, but it acts kind of more like a Mirage Step would, in a way. So what you would want to do here is maybe you go first, and you hopefully have this card in your hand, and you establish a bunch of Ralts. And then on your second turn, you play this, go gather the crew, go get 3 Kirlias, and then you just evolve them all right there, instead of having to evolve them on a turn end with TM Evolution. And TM Evolution only lets you evolve 2 of them. So kind of an interesting aspect to see played in Gardevoir. We're playing a Sinnoh because Lugia is annoying, Artisan for getting out the dudes, and we are playing an 8-2 split of energy. We need to have some dark energy for Monkey Dory's ability. Cool list. Now we start to get into the Dragapult decks. Let's see. So this Dragapult deck is playing a 2-2 engine of the Natuzatu, a couple Rotoms, very similar to why a Charizard would play a Rotom, and because we play a Rotom, we also play a Sealstone. And I mentioned earlier, Radiant Alakazam can fix a lot of numbers for Dragapult because you're always just hitting 200 to the active and spreading 6 damage counters to your opponent's bench. So if you want to kill maybe basic Vs and EX Pokemon in the active, being able to move that damage counters around with Radiant Alakazam can be very clutch, as well as a lot of decks are starting to play what we would consider the unoptimal 70 HP starters because of Dragapult. They don't want Dragapult to take a double KO or take out their little dudes on bench with this 6 damage counter spread. But Radiant Alakazam on the next turn can help you fix that math. Playing a standard Arven, Iono Boss for supporters. Only 2 candy. We're saying that we're going to use our Cloak, and for those of you that don't know, Cloak has very strong ability. Once during your turn, you may look at the top 2 cards of your deck and put one of them into your hand, and you put the other one at the bottom of your deck. So it kind of lets you get through your deck really fast, but you're not discarding those resources like you would with a Flower Select or like a Refinement ability. They just go to the bottom of your deck. So this is why the Dragapult engine is good in this next format. We are playing an Enhanced Hammer, which is an old card, but coming back in Twilight Masquerade, discard a special energy from one of your opponent's Pokemon. What you're really wanting to do with this is probably hit a Lugia's Legacy energy and put them into shambles. So that's a Lugia tech. And the ace spec for this deck is the Unfair Stamp, another new ace spec coming out in Twilight Masquerade for us. You can play this card only if one of your Pokemon was knocked out during an opponent's last turn. Each player shuffles their hand into their deck, then you draw 5 cards and your opponent draws 2. You can imagine this can be disruptive at any point of the game, but especially if your opponent takes an early KO, like going second, and you just Unfair Stamp them back and have a great setup after that, and there have a hand of 2 cards, you can see where this could be problems for your opponent. We play a 1 TM Devo and a 1 TM Evo rescue board to help move some dudes around the Collapse Stadium to try to manipulate your board into favor in a 4-3 energy split. And we were just mentioning smashing some Lugia energy, and it looks like Lugia was the 4th place deck. And Lugia has gotten a big buff in Twilight Masquerade. If you have not checked out my previous video, I just uploaded a video on Lugia looking over all the City League data and seeing how people are building Lugia. But this list just took 4th in a 3,000 person tournament, so let's take a look at this one. The big new card in Lugia is this Legacy Energy. As long as this Pokemon is attached to a Pokemon, it provides every energy but only one. Once per game, if a Pokemon this card is attached to is knocked out by damage from your opponent takes 1 fewer prize card. So it can reduce the prize card taking from like 2 to 1 or from 1 to none. But that effect, yes, can only be used once a game. But most importantly, this is a Rainbow Energy in Lugia that can be accelerated with Archeops and can enable you to use attackers you weren't able to use in Lugia before. So we can see that just like the good old days, we're playing Lumineon and Lugia, but we're going to be able to Aqua Return because we can fulfill that water energy requirement with the Legacy Energy. And same for Iron Hands. Iron Hands amp you very much. It takes 1 lightning energy, so you can charge him up with the Legacy Energy. The other new Pokemon addition to this deck, and as well as a bunch of other decks, is the Blood Moon Ursaluna. You can think of this Pokemon kind of like a Radiant Charizard, but it's a colorless and it only has colorless in its cost. This Pokemon's Blood Moon attacks cost colorless less for each prize card your opponent has taken. Starts off costing 5, can go down to 0. 260 health is a 2 prizer versus Radiant Charizard is 1 and is hitting for 240 damage. You can't use this attack on the next turn. Other than this, Lugia does get 1 new supporter that seems to be quite popular, and that is Carmine. If you go first, you may play this card during your first turn. One of the common complaints about playing Lugia is it is bricky. One way to fix that is being able to go get a supporter even if you go first with that Lumineon and draw a fresh 5 cards. Not too bad. Then the other supporters seem pretty standard. Standard Ball Search, Collapse, Messagoza, and a lot of special energy. The next list up, we have another Dragapult deck, but this time we see it with a little Comfy, which means we are pairing Dragapult with the Lost Zone engine. We see we're playing a 4-3-3 line of the Dragapult, and pretty standard lines of the Lost Box stuff going on here, and our Radiant is Charizard. Have a Manaphy in here for good measure. Colress, we do play a couple of Ionos in this build because we do want to see cards. We'll be going through a lot more cards than normal Lost Box because not only do we have Flower Selecting, which will switch into the active, but we also have the Reconnaissance Raid, which again allows us to look at 2 cards and take 1, put 1 at the bottom of our deck. Play 2 candy so we can help evolve up our Dragapults. They are good attackers in this deck. And yeah, other than that, kind of just basic Lost Box. 2 Jet Energy. I guess that's kind of notable as well. Hey, our buddy Snorlax. You know what that means? The 6th place list was Control. This is kind of our standard block / control. As long as this Pokemon is the active spot, your opponent's active cannot retreat. Has the Chi-Yu for mill, the Mimikyu to block big Pokemon from attacking. Got the Pidgeot V in here, so you have a Forest Seal Zone target and a way so you don't deck yourself out should you get into that kind of situation. And then you play just a lot of disruption and supporters, right? You play the Eerie to try to disrupt their hand. You play the Misfortune Sisters to try to bleed cards out of their deck. Erica's Invitation to pull Pokemon into the active. Silene and Yell's Cheer to recycle things. Giacomo to get rid of special energy. And the new item card. Actually, there's 2 new item cards that are in this list. One is the Fable Flute. Reveal the top 5 cards of your opponent's deck and put any number of basic Pokemon you find there onto your opponent's bench. Your opponent shuffles the other cards back into their deck. A lot of times when you're playing against control, you keep your bench really limited, and the Fable Flute here allows the control player to get more Pokemon onto your bench that maybe you didn't want. And the other interesting new card that's being played in this deck is the Handy Circulator. I don't think that'll be the translation for English, but it reads, if the Pokemon this card is attached to is your active Pokemon and is damaged by your opponent's attack, even if it's knocked out, move an energy from the attacking Pokemon to one of your opponent's benched Pokemon. So you can imagine this could be like very annoying if a Charizard attacks. Charizard decks usually play very thin energy lines, sometimes only like 6, and you could blow away one of their energies to another one of their Pokemon. Just Disruption is the name of the game. Standard tools to give us a bunch of health, Defiance Vest, Hero's Cape is the A-Spec, and 2 fire energies so that we can use Chi-Yu. Looks like our 7th place list was another Miraidon deck, but we do not have that one. And our 8th place list is a Dragapult deck. This one looks very similar to the other Dragapult deck we've already looked at. Very similar. I don't think it's the exact same 60, but close enough. We'll just keep on moving. We have another Lugia. This Lugia is playing a Weird Ear. Once during your turn, when this Pokemon moves from your bench to the active spot, you may move any energy attached to your other Pokemon to it. So it's a way to get a bunch of energy all onto this Pokemon. Then it does 40x for each energy attached. And this Lugia is actually not playing the new Carmine supporter, interestingly enough, and it's playing 3 Messagoza. And again, the Legacy Energy, this is just going to be the only A-Spec Lugia's play now. Looks like our 10th place deck was an Ancient Box. Then we have another Miraidon. This looks pretty similar to the other Miraidon we saw. I'm not sure quite exactly what's different. I don't think the other one was playing an EXP share, but this one is. I think the other one was playing maybe one more Lightning Energy as well. I think it was a 16 count. Some more Lugia. This Lugia looks similar to the first list we look at, and nothing too crazy here. We're going to see different counts of Carmine as people test out. It's probably a balance between how many Carmine do you play and how many Professor's Research do you play. And then the last 4 decks we unfortunately do not have, and I would have really liked to have seen this list. I did see this when watching the matches. The 13th place deck is actually a Gouging Fire list, which is super interesting. I believe there was a tournament, maybe it was in Singapore a month or so back, where a Gouging Fire deck did actually win, and it was very similar to that archetype that was seen there. Then we had another Lugia, we had a Tina, and a Lost Box. Those were a lot of really cool decks. It makes me really excited for the upcoming cards that are going to be released in our set, Twilight Masquerade, which I should have a video up on later this week after I play in my pre-release and get some cards in hand. But that's all I have for today. Let me know in the comments down below which of these decks you think you're going to be playing in the upcoming meta. And if you like what you saw here today, give it a thumbs up, hit the subscribe button. You know what to do. But until next time, peace.